Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Titans the Day After. I'm your host, Ken Moore. Thank you for joining me. Very disappointing loss for the Titans on Thursday night against the Indianapolis Colts, 34-17. The Titans come up short in the showdown between Phillip Rivers and Ryan Tannehill, the battle of number 17s. And number 17 for the Colts had an outstanding day, going 29 of 39 for over 300 yards as the Colts come out on top as they improve their record to 6-3 on the season. The Titans fall to 6-3 on the season, but now the Colts have the tiebreaker in lieu of that victory last night over Tennessee. So we'll get into the good, the bad, the concerning about Thursday night's loss to the Indianapolis Colts. What went wrong once again for Tennessee? I think we can all agree that the defense and special teams continues to let this team down at an alarming rate. The offense had its struggles as well, as they did not score in the second half, outscored 21-0 by Indy in the second half of that ball game as the Colts go on to a 34-17 victory. Now, the Titans will have 10 days off before their next game against the Baltimore Ravens next Sunday in Baltimore. And that will be the second game in a critical three-game stretch. The Ravens sandwiched in between two games against the Indianapolis Colts. But let's dive right into what went wrong last night in this ball game between the Titans and the Colts. And yes, we talked about it most of the post-game show as I joined Titan Upload. And if you will, go subscribe to his channel at Titan Upload if you have not done so. But please also, before we deep dive into this game, hit the subscribe button here on my channel. Hit the like button. It's very important for me to have that support from you guys to continue to be able to put out this content for you guys. And please feel free to leave any comments that you may have on this week's episode. But let's go ahead and deep dive into what went wrong last night. And yes, it began and ended with the special teams unit and the decision by Mike Vrabel to go with Trevor Daniel, the FedEx driver, former Tennessee Volunteer, who apparently had a couple of good days of practice on a short week. And that was enough to convince Mike Vrabel to go with him as our punter in the biggest game of the year, despite having good success from the punter who we got from the New England Patriots just the week before, that had worked with Stephen Gostkowski as his holder during his time with the Patriots, and who had a pretty good game against the Chicago Bears this past Sunday. But whatever happened in practice between Monday and Wednesday changed Vrabel's mind and changed the special teams coach's mind, and that Trevor Daniel would be the answer as the team's punter this week. And obviously, that decision did not pay off. Now, I do want to give credit to the Nashville media as they put Vrabel on the hot seat on Thursday night in his post-game press conference, and again on Friday morning, and asking Vrabel why he made that decision to change punters, especially for a primetime game, the biggest game of the season. And Vrabel, his answer was, it was hang time. Hang time. He felt that hang time was a reason why he went with the decision to go with Trevor Daniel. Now, I'm thinking hang time. Okay, so you maybe get an extra second, an extra half second on the punt. Is the risk really worth the reward in that situation? So I decided to do some deep diving and go take a look and see exactly what Vrabel was referring to and what he did not like or maybe didn't like in the Chicago game that Allen provided. So let's take a look at the numbers. Last Sunday, November 8th, Allen versus Chicago. The kid punted 8 times. He had a 50-yard average with a net of 40 yards. So the Bears returned 6 of those punts for about a 10.7-yard average. So he had a 40-yard net yard average. So that's, in my opinion, is pretty good for a backup punter that you just got off another team's practice squad. Now, do you want that every week if he's your primary punter? No, you typically want about a 43, 44-yard net average. But for a guy to kick 8 times, average of 50-yard average, and have a net of 40, that's pretty darn good. And then when you compare it to what Daniel did on Thursday night, punted 3 times for a 32-yard average, had 1 punt blocked, which wasn't his fault, but it kind of was his fault, and we'll get into why. But he had that 17-yard punt that really changed the complexion of this ball game when the Titans held Indy at the goal line, on the goal line stand. They moved the ball out to the 20-yard line. Tannehill takes a sack on 3rd down, which forces the punt. And then Daniel, under no pressure at all, shanks the ball out of bounds for a 17-yard kick that ultimately brought down his average to a 32-yard average. Now, what that did is on the very next possession, when the Titans went 3 and out and they had to punt the ball again from deep in their own end, that caused Frank Wright, the Indianapolis coach, to say, you know what, let's go ahead and go into punt block mode instead of punt return mode. And they put on the punt block unit. David Long, one of the protectors, made a mistake in who he was supposed to block, and that allowed a free rusher to get through on Daniel and caused the second block that led ultimately to an Indianapolis touchdown that turned the 3-point game into a 10-point game and ultimately put the Titans behind the 8 ball. And then to make matters worse on special teams, the Titans get the ball back. They drive downfield. They get in the red zone. They're unable to convert into a touchdown because they get a holding penalty on Nate Davis that negated a big run by Derrick Henry. So we have to bring out Stephen Gostkowski for a 44-yard field goal to cut the game back to a 7-point game with about 9 minutes left in the 4th quarter, still in good position to try to pull this game out. And what does Gostkowski do? As he typically does on any kick within 50 yards, he misses the 44-yard field goal, and it was all downhill from there. And the Titans ultimately ended up losing this game by 17 points, 34-17. And those 17 points were a direct result of the inadequacies in the kicking units. A shank punt, a block punt led to 14 direct points for the Indianapolis Colts. And then, of course, the field goal miss by Gostkowski led to the other 3 points, hence your 17-point defeat last night at the hands of the Indianapolis Colts. So now what do the Tennessee Titans do from here in regards to the special teams? In my opinion, neither one of these guys, Daniel or Gostkowski, should be on the team come next Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens when you have to travel to Baltimore. The time is up on Gostkowski as far as I'm concerned. He's been 6 of 7. He's been great from 50 yards and out. But the kid is 6 of 13, not a kid, the veteran of 6 of 13 on kicks within 50 yards. That's completely unacceptable. The Titans are the 32nd ranked unit in field goal kicking this year. You cannot be dead last in any category and consider yourself a Super Bowl contender. And right now, the Titans wake up on Friday, all of a sudden in second place in their division. Now, we'll take a step back, as this was the Titans' 6th game in 30 days. We talked about at the beginning of the month, or at the beginning of this 6-game stretch 30 days ago, that this would be a critical stretch for the Titans. They went into that stretch, they began it at 3-0. We said at worst, if they could go 3-3, they would still be in pretty good shape, considering they were coming out of the whole COVID situation. And you didn't know how that was going to play out. They had the 2 tough games right out of COVID with Buffalo and with Houston. We were able to survive those 2 games. And then you thought, hey, we could possibly go 4-2, maybe 5-1 in this stretch, but you blow the game to Pittsburgh on a Gauskowski miss. You totally lay an egg in Cincinnati. You come back with a decent victory last week against Chicago. And this game started off pretty good. You go down, you get an early score against the Colts. Looks like it's going to be a good night. And then all of a sudden, situations arise. You don't get some bounces that possibly could have gone your way, and you end up losing this ball game. But there was a lot more to this ball game on Thursday night than just the special teams. You had A.J. Brown, who only had 1 catch in this ball game for 21 yards. He dropped a potential touchdown down the far sideline on the second drive of the game that could have given us a 14-zip lead. And if A.J. Brown catches that ball, goes into the end zone, it changes the entire complexion of the ball game. You don't know how things would have gone after that. Does the Colts change their game plan somewhat? Do the Titans become a little bit more aggressive defensively with the Colts behind the 8 ball? Do the Colts stray away from their running game? We don't know how it all would have shaped out, but that was a big drop by A.J. Brown on that second possession when he had the ball in his hands and looks like he was going to have a big touchdown. Ryan Tannehill struggled again in this ball game, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the post game, but he struggled again for the 4th game in a row. So there's some concern there. And then, of course, the defense with all types of problems. And here's my issue with the defense, is that for at least the last 4 games, we've rolled out the exact same defensive game plan. There haven't been any changes in coverage. There haven't been any changes to how we rush quarterbacks, whether it's a mobile guy like Joe Burrow or whether it's statuesque guys like a Ben Roethlisberger or a Phillip Rivers or a Nick Foles. We were only able to register 1 sack last night against Phillip Rivers, which is completely unacceptable. And I wonder why we continue to only rush 4 guys. We don't send any blitz packages. We don't bring any guys off the edge. We don't overload maybe one side of the formation to cause the other team's offensive linemen to have to make decisions on who they're going to block, to maybe free up a free rusher to get inside and put pressure on the quarterback. That has been entirely disappointing to me, especially from Mike Vrabel, who's a defensive-minded coach. Fans have wondered how much we miss Dean Pease. Obviously, we're missing Dean Pease a lot. And it just comes down to, you have to make strategic adjustments from game to game. And the Titans have not done that over the past 4 games. And it's showing up. Teams are attacking us the same way. Our cornerbacks continue to play 7-8 yards off of receivers. Even if it's 3rd and short, 4th and short situations, we're given the same defensive look. And it's not just being effective. It's not effective at all. And this defense is going to have to make some changes in the second half of this season, or the Titans very well could find themselves fighting for a playoff spot when it's all said and done. Now, we're not going to focus entirely on the negative here. We do call it the day after. We look at the good, the bad, and the concerning. Obviously, we've already looked at the bad last night with the special teams. Let's take a look at some of the good from last night. And a guy that had a good game against the Colts last night was Derrick Henry. Henry had a great game, 19 rushes, 103 yards, averaged over 5.5 yards per carry, or nearly 5.5 yards per carry against the Colts, a Colts team that came into the ballgame only giving up 86 rushing yards per game. Henry had a lot of great runs, 15-yard carries, 12-yard carries. He had a couple of big runs when we made that critical fourth down goal line stop in the third quarter. He was able to run the ball out, get us out to the 20-yard line. Then if you remember, he had a big stiff arm against one of the Colts defensive linemen on first down. He had an 8-yard run on first down that set us up for a 2nd and 2. But then Henry had to come out of the game. His shoulder was hurting. You saw him on the sideline trying to kind of work out the stiffness. And that was really the turning point of the ball game when he had to come out and we had to put Deontay Foreman in. And Foreman, of course, caught the touchdown pass in the first quarter. And he had been really effective as a running back so far. But the Colts were able to come up with a big stop on 2nd and 2 on that possession. And then on third down, that's when Tannehill faked it to Foreman and tried to bootleg outside. And the defensive lineman was able to trip him up by his ankles. And he got dropped for the loss back to the 10-yard line. And then that's when the whole punting fiasco came into play at that point. But other than that, Derrick Henry had a really good night rushing the football. And ironically, the second game this season now that Derrick has had over 100 yards rushing the football, and the Titans come away with a loss. So that's something we did not expect, something we had not seen in the past, is the Titans rushing for over 100 yards with Derrick Henry, but us still taking the L. So that was disappointing, to say the least. So again, we want you guys to hit subscribe if you're just logging in, hit the like button, leave comments, leave questions, and I will be happy to answer those questions. Now we move to the concerning, and what's concerning going forward for the Tennessee Titans. And ladies and gentlemen, we all know it. It has to be the defense. And the defense continues to struggle in their coverages. But what's most concerning to me, or equally concerning, I should say, is the amount of snaps that the guys up front, particularly the outside linebackers, are taking. And as we take a look, Harold Landry, which was really a concern coming into this season, when you look at his numbers, have consistently been over 90% of the snaps. Actually, on Thursday night, it went down a little bit. He took 99% of the snaps on Sunday. Thursday night against the Colts, he played 64 snaps, which was 91% of the snaps. Clowney, coming off the knee injury, 52 snaps, which was 74% of the time he was in the ballgame. Derek Roberson, we're still looking for Derek to get unleashed. Last week, with Clowney out, he played 50% of the snaps. Thursday night, only 16% of the snaps. He was only in for 11 snaps. In my opinion, for this unit to become more effective, Derek Roberson needs to get some of these snaps away from Landry and Clowney, because what's that gonna do is give those guys more energy, more strength to give 100% effort the times that they are on the clock. When you're playing this many snaps, particularly for Harold Landry, there's no way you can consistently get to the quarterback and amount pressure. And I believe that's why Landry's sack numbers are so down this year, is because he's playing too many snaps. You have to get Derek Roberson involved, and I don't know why the Titans don't realize that. Now you look down here at Jack Crawford, he's kind of our fourth outside rusher, if you will, from the defensive end position. He played 46% of the snaps on Sunday night. Very little effectiveness. I think he had a couple of quarterback pressures, but these numbers have to get more equally distributed, in my opinion, for the Titans pass rush to become more effective. If we don't get these numbers more equally distributed, I think the Titans are going to continue to have the same problems that they've had for the entire season. So hopefully during this extended break, Vrabel will make the necessary adjustments that we need to make to try to get this defense performing at a higher level. He made some comments in his press conference that the team, unlike last year where the team was getting better each and every week, that has not happened this year. And it is my belief that has not happened primarily because of the coaching or lack thereof, the lack of creativity on the defensive side of the ball. In my opinion, it's not the players at this point. The players are who the players are. We can't go back and get Logan Ryan. We still are waiting on Adoree Jackson. Vic Beasley is gone. The four outside rushers that I just showed you on the graphic, those are going to be the guys that we have to go with the remainder of the season for the most part. So it's going to be up to the defensive coaches to put these guys in position to succeed. And if they don't put them in position to succeed, then we're going to have to heavily depend on our offense to get back to scoring 35 to 38 points per game. One other area of concern, in my opinion, is Ryan Tannehill. I talked about it last week. You look at the numbers from last night in his comparison to Phillip Rivers, and Rivers dominated that matchup. Tannehill, only 15 of 27, 147 yards, another game under 200 yards throwing the football, only an 83 passer rating. He was sacked once, and he took 5 hits. Now, I will give Tannehill credit for standing strong in the pocket. He took a lot of hits last night. Some of those hits I felt should have been personal fouls as he was driven into the turf a couple of times. But nevertheless, he made some poor choices on some of the places where he decided to deliver the football. On 1 3rd and 9 we had in the third quarter, he went across the middle to Ferkser, who was double covered. He had A.J. Brown wide open on the outside, who had press man-to-man coverage. Anytime A.J. Brown has press man-to-man coverage on the outside, you have to give A.J. Brown an opportunity. A.J. Brown only had 4 targets last night. That is not enough for your number one receiver. You have to find a way to get A.J. Brown the football. We have to find a way to get Jonnu Smith more involved in the offense. He had one pass play where he was open. He had beat his defender by 2 or 3 yards, and Tannehill overthrew him on a corner route. So Tannehill has got to get more productive the second half of the season. He's got to get back to the Ryan Tannehill we saw early this season, that we saw all of last year, because it's going to be up to this offense now to carry the defense, to carry the special teams, and that's gonna rely on Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill, along with A.J. Brown and Corey Davis, to start making bigger and better plays on the offensive side of the ball. And you look at Phillip Rivers last night. I mean, just unbelievable numbers for him. That old man should not be putting up these type of numbers. 308 yards, 105 passer rating. We only hit this guy 2 times last night. That is completely unacceptable, where Phillip Rivers only gets hit twice in an NFL game by what's supposed to be a good football team. That is a failure by the Titans defensively to generate pressure, to generate a scheme, to create opportunities to put pressure on an immobile quarterback. And that's the reason why we took the loss last night. So those are some of my keys to why we lost that game. We have the Ravens coming up next Sunday. We have to find a way over the next 9 to 10 days to get this football team better. Do I think we can? Yes, I think we can. My confidence level on a scale of 1 to 10 is probably about a 6, because I still think we have a really good football team. I think the coaching has failed us over the past 3 or 4 games. But looking at the bright side, we had the 5-0 start. We had a little bit of a cushion. Now that cushion is gone. The next 2 games are going to be critical in where we finish. Because even if we defeat Baltimore next week, we have to beat the Colts in Indy in 2 weeks. That is a must-win game no matter what happens in Baltimore. We can afford to, you don't want to, but you can afford to lose in Baltimore. And even if Indy beats Green Bay next week, they have a 1-game lead. But if you go into Indy the following week, you win that ball game, you retake the tiebreaker because your head-to-head will be even, and you still have the division tiebreaker because the Colts have that loss to Jacksonville, and we would have the 1 loss to each other. So the Colts would then have 2 division losses. So the whole key to this 3-game stretch is that we had to split with Indy. So everything is still in front of the Titans to be successful. So yes, we're feeling down. We're feeling frustrated as fans, as members of the media, but let's try to take the positive approach, glass half full rather than half empty. And if we can go and beat Indy in 2 weeks, we're right back where we need to be. But the Titans are going to have to make the necessary adjustments. They're going to have to make the necessary roster moves, no matter how difficult those are, over the next week. If you can bench a punter who's averaging 50 yards a punt on 8 kicks because another FedEx delivery guy had a better day of practice, then you can cut Stephen Gostkowski, who's had 2 months of uneven performances and is the worst field goal kicker percentage-wise in the NFL. You can cut Stephen Gostkowski if you can bench your punter after 1 or 2 days of perceived bad practice. So that's what I have for this week's episode of Titans the Day After. Again, on your way out, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button. Please leave your comments, and we'll see you next week on Titans the Day After.